Hello and welcome back to episode 2 of the Rubbish Talk podcast. So thank you very much everyone. We've returned again because we did get some listeners and downloads for episode 1. So thank you to everyone for listening, tuning in and for the good feedback as well. It's really positive. So you're here with myself, Heather Beattie.
And Alistair Meldrum.
And we are back for episode 2. We're going to cover some topical issues, the headlines that we saw this week that interested us from the waste and resource management industry, and then we'll go into a really interesting interview with our first official guest, Grant Keenan from Keenan Recycling.
Perfect, thank you. So the first topic we're going to cover briefly is, and this is probably a little bit more than a week old, is the deposit return scheme that's due to be put out in Scotland, whereby any bottles that public buy in shops, so that's plastic bottles, glass bottles and cans, that you will pay a 20%, not 20% deposit, a 20 pence deposit on these, and obviously if you take them back to the shop, you'll get your deposit, your 20 pence returned, and that's due to go live in Scotland later in the year, in August of the year. And what was really interesting, or what we thought was really interesting, was Falkirk Council have discussed at their last committee meeting that they are looking to remove the glass collection system from the public. So the vehicle that's going around lifting glass bottles from the householders, they're going to discontinue that service because their logic is there won't be any glass bottles to collect because they'll all be getting returned to the shops for 20 pence. So potentially the householders are going to have if you like, a worse service because they've no longer got glass collection. But the reality is, if you're going to get 20 pence a bottle, you're probably going to take them back to the shops. So that story has been kicking up for a while. Over the new year, Zero Waste Scotland came out with that no, they shouldn't really do that, but it's maybe one of the sort of unintended consequences of the deposit return scheme that we have got a sector which is the councils go out and recycle it, they collect the glass bottles, and that's done in a sort of economic way in terms of vehicle movements and so on. But if a lot of that waste is going to be removed from the system by the DRS, then that's going to make these, some of these systems change. So I think the reality is that, household collections are going to change as a result of the deposit return scheme, and it'll be really interesting over the year to see how that progresses. Does that make sense to yourself, Heather, as somebody maybe doesn't know all the detail behind the
it is interesting to see and keep up with it, and I think I just wonder how it will work and if people will kind of go along with the scheme. And it's just the same as everything, you kind of want to be a wee bit positive, but you think, well, we're already struggling with people taking things to their household recycling centres or recycling properly. Are they going to bother? I know there's the monetary return they've got now, but it'd be interesting to see when it does roll out how quickly people will adapt to taking them to whether it's the vending machines or taking them back to their supermarkets and things. So, I mean, I think it's really positive, but I think, as you said, that as it gets closer to launching, I think we will see more similar headlines of things. Unintended consequences is a great way to word it, because there's things that maybe won't come out of the woodwork until we're almost at kind of launch date. So I think it's maybe one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It'll be interesting. I think the only thing I would say is for local authorities at the moment, it's very, very difficult for them to plan ahead because they don't know how big an impact it's going to have. And the things with, if you think of your glass collection in your household, yes, it's glass bottles in there, but you've also got jars and things like that. So, we're maybe losing the opportunity to collect these and recycle them. So, as you say, it's one worth watching. The other one that I picked up recently was this was to do with e-cigarettes. So these horrible contraptions, the vapes or whatever they call them, that I think it was Waitrose had decided that they were going to ban the sale of disposable vapes, on sort of environmental grounds, if you like. And the manufacturer, one of the main manufacturers of the disposable vapes, said that was, came out with an article saying that's a bit hypocritical, because you're quite happy to sell cigarettes and you get loads of cigarette butts discarded in the ground. There's huge littering problem with cigarettes, and there's also an air quality issue with cigarettes because it's putting contamination into the environment. And to a certain extent, they're probably correct in that they're sort of challenging, the cigarette industry and the waste and the environmental issues that result from that. But when you look at a vape's not a huge amount better. The vape actually contains a lithium-ion battery. The liquid in the vape is actually a hazardous waste material, so in big enough quantities is hazardous material. And then the plastic that uses up or makes up the most of the vape potentially has persistent organic pollutants in it. Not all of them do, but some of them do. So, and they're classified as waste and electrical equipment, and effectively, on the whole, they're being discarded. And I think somebody and we probably should dig out the person that I found on Twitter, went for a walk and managed to find, ridiculous amount of vapes in 40 minutes. She was finding one disposable vape a minute, just walking around the street. So that's the size and scale of the problem. So, big issues there in terms of, and then you've got the other side of that with the health impacts of, potentially young kids using vapes and things like that. So it was just, I thought it was interesting that, the vape company had sort of challenged Waitrose on the cigarette side, but then you think, well, are their credentials any really any better?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting. We talked about it between yourself and across Albi Environmental on Twitter. There was a wee bit of a discussion about it. So at Albi ENV on Twitter, if you want to get involved. We had a bit of a discussion. You had some responses, and then it got me down the rabbit hole of actually looking at like some of the stats and things. And without reading anything, that the popularity of the vapes or e-cigarettes, disposable vapes, is significantly risen, and you see it all the time, especially I think in younger generation as well. It's quite popular now, or a trend, I don't know, but some of the stats are really, really alarming. It was something like around like 1.3 million disposable vapes are thrown away every week in the UK. So we could maybe do some fact checking on the comparison to actual cigarettes, as you said, butts and things lying around. Maybe it's because they're colourful and they're plastic and you notice them more on the street, and that's why people think it's worse. But as you said, like more than that, it's just the complications of the materials that they're made up of as well is huge, and I think that's where the confusion comes in of how to deal with it. And it is categorised as we, but do people know that? Is there the producer responsibility there? Like, are they following it? It is regulated, but it's relatively new as well. So, and not to mention, the dangers that come along with it. I was reading things just last week about if they're, end up in residual household waste or whatever, and potential fires at some of the recycling plants or the waste plants or whatever. It just brings so many complications on top of, as you said, both the environmental and the public health concerns. So yeah, it's something that I think we'll see a lot on as well, and a lot of people in the industry hopefully will give their opinion on it and their take, and there might be more to come of how we manage that a bit better. But it's something for people to think about, and I wonder if people do actually know. I don't know if it would be common knowledge. Do they know that what they've to do with them when it's finished? Do they know that it can be taken to your local recycling centre, or returned to the shop that they brought, or any shop that sells them? I suppose I think maybe that's a good start, just to get the message out there, as that's what you have to do with them. Because I certainly wouldn't have known that, and I wonder if everyone buying them does. So maybe that's the first step to tackling the problem. But who knows? It's very, very more complex than that.
Yeah. Two things you mentioned there, Heather, that are potential I would say potential future topics for us to talk about. There's, you know, waste batteries in the waste stream are a huge issue for the sector, and that's primarily because they cause fires, and fires within the waste sector are a big issue. And some of the big waste management companies have had pretty big campaigns about batteries and putting batteries in the same. So we'll hopefully cover that in a. We'll find somebody we can talk about that subject. Yeah. Another one is this, I mentioned earlier, this persistent organic pollutants. So this is things that generally they've been used as a flame retarder within things like furniture and so on. And there's been a big change in legislation about how that's applied. So it means that you know, most furniture, sofas, things like that need to go for incineration. You know, rather than landfill disposal, and that's a big change that's in the sector that's coming out that will have implications for how things are managed in the future. So a couple of ideas for us, you know, for future. So if there is anybody listening that's got expertise in any of these areas, then quite happy to hear from you. So the next thing we're going to cover was I was looking for a little bit of a rant. Well, it's not really a rant. It's a discussion. So it struck me over out for a walk and so on. I live in Ayr, so I'm down at the seaside, and all the way along the shorefront are park benches that people have you know, maybe family members of deceased and so on, and they paid for a park bench with a, you know, little plaque to their relative. But quite often now what you see is people placing, you know, holly wreaths, or they're placing flowers, or placing various items on the bench. And my view, my grumbly view is that they paid to have the bench there, and they've donated that to the public. They've donated that for the public to use. So I don't really think, my view is, I don't think that's, you know, it's their place to put a memorial to their relative on that bench, because it's a public bench. Now I know that's maybe a controversial view. That, you know, some people might think, well, you know, I've paid for a bench for my dear departed relative, therefore I've got every right to put a bunch of flowers there. But where it becomes an issue, I think, is when the flowers are half dead, they're in the plastic. So how does the refuse collection worker know that he can remove these, or how does they know he can, you know, the holly wreath that's been ripped to bits, or in some cases it's blocking people sitting in the seat because it's right in the middle of the seat. You know, when or how should that be removed? So it's, you know, that was my. It's not so much a rant, it was just a, you know,
your thought. Yeah,
just
I mean,
a thought process of, is it right or wrong?
It's certainly not something that's ever crossed my mind to think too much about. And it's funny you say that. It's things I say about how do you switch off from work. You're probably seeing that on your wee walk along the beachfront or your run, and your mind straight away goes to the wider issue, the waste issue. Why is it there? Will somebody clear it? I don't know. I mean, you know, now you've said it, something I've thought about. I can't say I've ever really noticed, but you know, my kind of opposing question or opinion would be, does the same apply within, you know, a cemetery or a graveyard or whatever, people leaving things, because essentially that's where their memorial place. I think that's absolutely, in my opinion, I would say that's absolutely fine. I wouldn't have thought twice about people doing that. But what I do like to see is that if they've left flowers, etc., they've taken off the packaging. There's no plastic, there's no rubber bands, there's no stickers. I think that goes a long way. But then also, as you said, coming back to clear it away, clear it up, especially if it's a public place. You want it to look nice first and foremost, but then you don't want to be contributing to a problem and having the waste and then essentially leaving it up to someone else to decide morally. Should, as you said, it'd be good to get an opinion weighed in from someone, local authority, any of the base teams. What do you do? What do you advise? What do you think? You know, are you going to be the one that someone says, complains about, saying, oh, that pesky council's went and removed their memorial thing? It's a bit of a difficult one, and I don't actually know if there is certain guidance out there for the local authorities what they should do. don't know, it'd be great to see it. It might be quite a controversial one because I think people like to put things down, especially if they feel I've sponsored that or that's my family's bench. That's where we used to remember them or celebrate. But this is a public bench.
It's not your family's bench. It's a public bench that you've donated.
Yeah. See, I think that's where you'll find people are. The debate lies more so than whether you should put stuff down. People say, well, it's mine, I paid for it, or it's my family's. But as you will say, it is a public place. Would you leave, not saying it's rubbish, but would you just leave items on another random public place if it wasn't?
Exactly.
His name on it. Yeah, it's interesting.
I think we should do, Heather, is put. I think we've got the ability. We might have the technical expertise to put a bit of a poll at the end of the podcast, and we could ask the question whether the people. We might need to think about the questions we ask, but we'll ask the question whether people think it's. Whether I'm right or you're wrong.
We'll see how we word it. I would be really intrigued though to get the public's opinion, because I don't want to offend anyone, but I also don't know if there is a right. From what we had to think about, somebody from the council, have they got guidance? That's probably what you would follow, depending on what they say is right or wrong. But again, this topic, it comes down quite a lot to moral opinions and what they think people want to do, and should you move it, should you be allowed to use it as a space for remembrance or whatever. So
I think the two things I would add to that is one, I think it's something that's becoming a bit more prominent. I think there's for whatever reason there's more of this happening, so it's then more obvious. And I think the second one is I think councils for like the cemeteries and stuff probably have a sort of guidance and a rule and so on, but I don't think they've got the same sort of level of rule for the sort of public benches, maybe because it's not been that big an issue, or it's not been raised that much in the past. So let's leave it. Let's leave it at that and put a bit of a poll. If anybody's got any ideas about what they do or good things, we're happy to share that on future podcasts.
Yeah, I couldn't say what I think is right or wrong. I actually, not because I don't want to, because I don't know now. It was never something I'd thought about until you brought up, and now I think I have no idea. So it would be good to see what anyone else thinks.
There we go. Now on to guest, our first official guest of the podcast series, since I probably never counted as a guest since I was the co-host.
External guest.
Yeah, we have Grant Keenan today. So Grant Keenan is Director of Keenan Recycling, and he took us through a journey of both his career and Keenan's career. So not Keenan's career, the company's growth, quite exciting times in terms of his organisation and how they've grown, how they've expanded from a base in Aberdeen in Scotland, and is very much focused on food waste, and organic waste, turning that into compost or turning that into either energy and digestate from AD plants. So I do a good chat with Grant. So we'll just go over directly to the interview with Grant. Yeah. Well, good morning and welcome to our first official guest. Last week we had myself and Heather, but this week we've got Grant Keenan from Keenan Recycling. So good morning, Grant. How are you?
Good morning, Alistair. Good to be here. I'm very well, thanks. Yeah, yourself?
Not bad at all. Not bad at all. So just what we're planning doing with these podcasts is really just to kick off things is get a wee bit of a description from yourself, how you got into the waste management industry, and what was your journey into the waste management industry. This is not really an industry people plan to go to when they leave school or whatever. So just in your own words and your own time.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, the majority of people I know didn't set out to deliberately be in waste. That seems to be something that people fall into, and then once you're in it, you can't seem to leave. It's like the Hotel California. I started my first business when I was 19, which was a fuel business. I was importing peat briquettes from Bordnamona in Ireland, and I used to go around filling stations with bottles of gas and paraffin and all the things that you see. But a lot of that was winter orientated. So in the summer, I started selling garden bark. And then I realised that there was more money in the bark side of things than the fuel. So I sold the fuel business to a company called Northeastern Fuels. And with the proceeds I got from that business, I invested in some recycling equipment, basically to start milling my own garden bark. So I bought a small shredder and I bought a Dobstat trommel screen for taking the sticks out. So at that point, I still didn't know anything about waste. I was in my late 20s at the time, so this would have been sort of early 2001. I thought, well, I knew the machine came from the recycling industry, and I wondered if I could hire it because it was mobile. It was 25 tons, and it was quite an expensive bit of kit. So I went to our local authority, Aberdeenshire Council, and asked if they wanted to hire it. And at the meeting, they told me they didn't because they had their own static trommels. But as I was leaving the yard in Mintlaw, I saw a pile of garden waste in the corner. And just making conversation, I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Garden waste." I said, "What do you do with it?" He said, "Landfill." And I didn't even know what landfill was at that time, really. And that was the time where everybody landfilled everything because landfill tax was only £12 a tonne. Recycling hadn't really got going. Composting certainly wasn't talked about. Everyone kind of knows about composting now, but in those days it wasn't really a thing. So, but I knew that I could the organic matter composted because I used to make a composted bark mulch. So I asked him what it cost to go to landfill, and he said, all in all, it was about £30 a tonne by the time they paid the tipping fee plus the tax. And I kind of thought it seems like a bit of a waste of a resource. An alarm bell was kind of ringing in my head. I was always looking for opportunities, and I said to him, well, if I could take that for half what it costs you to go to landfill and compost it, would you send it to me? So they agreed, and they put skips around the recycling centres in Aberdeenshire. And fortunate good bit of luck was that my father was in the oil industry, and he'd bought a small farm out at New Deer, 75 acres. So he just let the ground, it wasn't big enough to farm or anything. He continued to work in oil, but it meant that I physically had somewhere to do it. So all I did was take an acre of ground, took the topsoil off, and the truck started rolling in. I then went to other local authorities and said, what do you do with your garden waste? They said, well, landfill it. Why? And I said, well, come and see what we're doing for Aberdeenshire Council. So they all liked it and put skips aside. And then I think it was about 2 or 3 years later, I went back to them and I said, look, why don't you give everyone that's got a garden a wheelie bin, and then we could get more diversion from landfill and promote more composting. And the other thing that played to my favour was that landfill tax, if you recall, had started escalating from £3 a tonne to £8 a tonne. So it's starting to go up significantly. So what I was offering became more and more appealing. So then all the houses in Aberdeen that had gardens got the wheelie bin, and then Moray Council closely followed suit. And then I went back to my father and asked him if I could have another 6 acres. And we took the topsoil off that, moved to a waste management licence, put concrete down, started investing in processes and equipment. And that's when it started to kind of morph into a reasonable size business. So then once I'd kind of captured all the garden waste in the northeast, I was keen to expand and grow the business. But I didn't want to be just another waste management company because they were already operating in that space. I wanted to do something niche and different that no one else was doing. So I thought about food waste, because I knew you could compost food. And this was before anaerobic digestion and energy really took off. So I went back to Aberdeen City Council and I said, look, if I build a big facility to compost food waste, would you collect it from the household? So they agreed, and my sell to them was quite simple, was that with the rise in the £8 a tonne landfill tax escalator, and then you'll remember this, Alistair, the LATS scheme. Remember the councils were going to get fined potentially £150 a tonne for levels that weren't recycled. So all of a sudden, they were staring down the barrel of £200 a tonne, and I was sort of saying, well, if you sign a 5-year deal with me at £60 a tonne, I'll insulate you against all the rising costs and everything. So the council agreed, and the householders got the little caddy that went into the brown bin. Murray Council followed again, and then eventually Aberdeen joined in with a food waste only collection. So the problem was at that point, though, when I'd costed it out, it was 3.2 million to build the first phase of the plant. It was still quite a small business at that point. So I went to Scottish Government and said to them, look, I've got an idea for organic recycling. I think if it works, it could be used as a blueprint for other local authorities, but I said I need some capital assistance. And again, fortunately for me, RAP at the time, the Waste Resources Action Programme, had just started, and they had identified that there was a gap in the market, that companies like myself needed capital help if they wanted to promote recycling. So I managed to get a grant for 432,000 towards it. I say me, it was actually my brother Gregor, who's our operations director. I give him some credit there.
He got the credit.
Yeah, he got the grant, to be fair. So that then meant that we were able to go to the bank and say, look, we've got some cash here to build the facility. Problem was I was 500,000 short still. So again, another good bit of luck was that my dad had successfully done a management buyout of an offshore survival business with venture capital's company 3i and Bank of Scotland, and they'd made a successful exit to Petrofac. So he put the 500,000 in and took an equity stake in the business, and then we built it on time and on budget. And then after that, I had a big facility that was looking to do food. And I then thought, well, what about all the restaurants and hotels? I knew nothing about food waste collections or lorries or transport or anything. But it's one of these things, I think, that when you're young, what you don't know what you don't know, but it doesn't hold you back because you just think that you can do anything. So
it's maybe worth sorry, but in there, Grant, in terms of so part of the idea with these podcasts is to try and sort of explain to people how the waste sector works, and you're obviously quite close to the compost and the anaerobic digestion and so on. But is it worth maybe try to explain what happens to the food and why you've got to have a specialist facility, and what the options are for councils, whether it's anaerobic digestion plants or whether it's what I would call an in-vessel composting system?
Yeah, that's fine. So at the most basic and cheapest level, you have garden waste, which can be composted outdoors in open air windrow systems. So effectively, the waste comes in, it gets shred, it gets built into a windrow, it then gets turned about roughly 7 or 8 times, and then it gets screened through a trommel and goes out as BSI Pass 100. The next thing that is available for a local authority, if they want to put food in with the garden waste, then that's what we call a commingled collection of garden and food waste. And the law stipulates that must, it falls under the animal byproduct regulations that came out in 2002 or 3, I think it was.
Yeah.
Because previously you used to be able to treat food waste outdoors, but after BSE and foot and mouth and things like that, it was deemed to be a risk. So tighter measures had to be in place. So the State Veterinary Service, as well as SEPA, kind of polices that section. So we have what you call an in-vessel composting system. So essentially what that means is that the animal byproduct element of the waste stream, which is effectively food waste because it has meat in it, hence the animal byproduct part of it, it has to be in sealed conditions until it's sanitized. So the waste comes into a big reception building. We have pickers, litter pickers that will pull out any big visible bits of contamination. It then gets put through a high-speed shredder, which breaks the material down to it's 12 mil in any one plane, so like a pencil would be okay, and that's so that the temperature can get right to the middle of it. So once it's shred, we then mix it with woody material, which balances the carbon-nitrogen ratio, and then we add in hydrated lime, which raises the pH. Once the blend's created, it goes into a hopper, up a conveyor, and into big vessels called VCUs, which are vertical composting units. Once they're in the units, it's all SCADA controlled, so you tell the system draw more air through it, or release this amount of waste, or add in more. So by law, it has to get to 70 degrees for an hour, and then the State Veterinary Service is satisfied that any pathogens, E. coli or Salmonella or Enterobacteriaceae, anything like that is killed. Once it's up to temperature, we then tell the computer, discharge cell 6 or whatever it is. It goes along a conveyor, up another conveyor, and into the maturation building, where we draw air through it for around 4 weeks, and then it moves outside, gets screened, and then goes off for sale to farmers or landscapers. If it's food on its own, so that's like a wet collection, so no woody material, then the best place for that really is anaerobic digestion, where the plants will starve the material of oxygen, which creates methane. They then harvest the methane gas, which then is either turned into a natural gas and fed into the grid, or it's liquefied and used to drive. It's like a generator type operation where it creates green electricity, which is also fed into the grid. We have a couple of biofuel facilities as well that make the fuel for the anaerobic digesters. So we have equipment that take in the packaging, you know, like bread and bacon and things like that. It'll remove the packaging, liquefy the food element, then we put it in our tankers, and we'll deliver that to anaerobic digestion plants, and they'll plug it in and create the gas.
Yeah. Perfect description. Thank you. It's you know, in terms of, I suppose what you're doing to a certain extent, you're taking food waste and you're creating some sort of value from it. You know, if it's anaerobic digestion, you're getting energy in the digestate that can be applied to land, and similar with the compost. And how difficult has it been to get that market? You know, how readily do farmers take your compost or take your anaerobic digestion material?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's been a long journey. I mean, you've been in the industry a long time, Alistair. You remember the battles that our sector had. I think the problem is that if you look back to 50 years ago, farmers understood the value of organic material because you had that closed loop with the animals, and they used to gather up the human excrement from flats and tenements and houses, and it went out to land, and then they realized that it was rich in nutrition and grew crops. And then with industrial age, then became convenience, and fertilizer was made from chemicals, and it was all just quick bang into the ground. It's all about what yield you can get quickly from a crop, and then you harvest it, and then you plough again. And over the years, I think the agricultural sector hadn't really focused on the fact that when you keep taking goodness out the soil, eventually it depletes, and something has to give. So when we came along with a new product, it was alien to them. They hadn't seen it. It still had a bit of a stigma of waste. I think part of the problem, if I'm totally honest, is our industry didn't help either. We got it all wrong, and at outset, I think everybody kind of thought, oh, well, we'll create this compost and it'll go to horticulture. And a lot of the past 100 tests were all about seed germination and top growth in tomato plants and all the rest of it. And there was a lot of effort put into nice brochures for horticulture and things. And don't get me wrong, that has its place. But what we need is somewhere that can take large volumes, because obviously when the council started recycling, they were ahead of the market, and the volumes kind of rushed out our industry before we had time to develop an outlet. So we didn't help, because we went to the farmers and more or less said, we've been paid to take this stuff. We know it's good for your soil. You can have it for free. So the conception of anything that you give somebody for free is that, oh, it must be worthless, it'll be no good.
Yeah.
You know, I'll just stick with my muck. So, and then what happened was sites like myself built up, you know, piles of stockpiles, and then farmers would say, "Oh, you're getting rid of that stuff." And then our industry used phrases like "getting rid," you know. And then what happened was, at the time, it seemed horrendous, and it was horrendous for industry, but it was one of the best things that ever happened, was that QMS, Quality Meat Scotland, actually banned it from going on their members' land, because they didn't fully understand it. They just thought, oh, we're not having waste in our quality assured scheme. However, they didn't appreciate it wasn't waste, it was a product, because it met the BSI standard, and just banned it. And then what happened was, it meant that all of a sudden the whole market just absolutely dried up everywhere. And we couldn't shift it, and then that went back down, right down to the local authorities, where we were saying that we might not be able to take your organic waste, and then that would filter down to Scotland's recycling rates failing completely. So, but what happened was that it was almost like the forbidden fruit, that all of a sudden farmers' costs were absolutely rising. They were getting a lot of publicity for the compost. It was on people's radars. We were, at the same time, we'd done some demonstrations for farmers where we did a full application, a half application, and no compost, and you could stand at the side of the road and visibly see the difference. So the word was spreading, and the farmers wanted it, and we were saying, well, sorry, you can't have it if you're in QMS. So the more that they wanted it, and we told them they couldn't have it, the more desirable it came. And when we kind of battled through the moratorium, and RAP spent £1 million in research to demonstrate that it was safe, eventually, when the moratorium got lifted, there was a rush of farmers, and we said, well, it's supply and demand, you need to pay for it now. And we started charging a few pounds, and then they started seeing the benefit, and now the demands outstrip the supply, which is where we need to be. But it's all about how we market our product and use correct terminology. We create a valuable product. We don't get rid of waste. You know, that's the thing.
I think the best description a farmer told me about it was the way it's not just adding nutrient to the soil, it's adding the structure to the soil, and it's then releasing a nutrient over a period of time that you can't match by chemical fertilizer. And is that almost that hidden value within it that I think farmers are probably now realising, particularly with the price of fertilizers going through the roof, that now seeing the value. Okay, sorry, we're distracted down the journey of thinking. You were back at when you were doing food waste collections, presumably in Aberdeen.
So well, originally, because I'd built the facility, I went to all the waste management companies in Aberdeen and said, look, I've built this facility, how about you guys collect food waste and we'll process it? And they all said, yeah, great idea. And a year went by, nobody brought us anything. So I thought the only way we're going to do this is to put one truck on the road and start collecting it. So I went back to them and I said, look, you guys haven't brought me anything, so I'm going to put a truck on the road, but it means that I'll be lifting food waste from your customers, which also means that if I put my bins in, some of your bins have to come out. And originally there was oh, you can't do that, they're our customers. And I'd said to them, look, I don't want to fight or fall out with the waste industry in Aberdeen. I said, I think we can all work together. And they were amenable to the idea, and I presented it. It was quite a simple pitch. Was, look, I'll provide my truck, my guy, I'll put the bins in, you keep the customer. So oil companies like BP and Shell that were keen to do it, the big waste companies kept them. So I said, look, I'll invoice you, you take a margin, you invoice your customer, and we're all happy. And I said, and at the same time, what you'll find is your landfill tax costs, or landfill costs in general, will radically be reduced because you won't be landfilling food, which is extremely heavy. If you take the weight out your vehicles then become far more efficient because you're not hitting your weight limit, so you can ram in far more collections. And also the quality of everything else that you collect, you'll be able to drive a better value. because it won't be covered in food waste. And also your customers will love it, because if you take BP, their recycling rate in their big offices was 53, and they deked 1% here and there over the years, and then all of a sudden it jumped 30% when we started recycling food. And they were kind of staggered that, God, this seems too good to be true, that we'll make money every time you do the work and all these benefits. What's the downside? I said, there is absolutely no downside to this at all. And so it was great for us because it meant two things. It meant we had armies of sales people, which were effectively all the waste management companies that we worked with promoting our service. So they brought us loads of work, and also meant that I'd taken away any desire for any of them to try and build a facility or compete with us, because why would they? Because they were making money off with no risk or investment off of the back of what we were doing. So we built it up, one truck and then another truck, until usual kind of story, we'd saturated the area that we operated in. And then we thought, well, what about Glasgow, Edinburgh, rest of Scotland? So we took a plunge to go down there. I should say as well, at that point, we took in external investment from Business Growth Fund, otherwise known as BGF. Two reasons for that was, one, I wanted to pay my father back his money. My brother and I wanted to de-risk a bit, so we got some cash off the table, and I wanted to be properly capitalised to go and start a venture down there, because all the trucks at that time were 130,000. We spent 200,000 on advertising. We opened offices. We hired 7 salespeople that all had company cars and vans and laptops and everything that goes with it. We advertised on the radio, and so then quite quickly we saturated Scotland, and then a lot of the brokers and the big companies like Biffa and Veolia and Suez were saying, look, we really like what you do in Scotland, could you come to England? Which seemed quite daunting at the time, and we decided that's what we would do, and just started, opened up in Newcastle, then Manchester, then Leeds. So now we've 17 depots across the UK. We cover every postcode. There's nowhere we don't go. And then, so that's kind of how we arrived at this position.
Yeah.
That's a pretty impressive level of growth. So how long is that since? When did you start? 2000?
So 2001. 2001, I bought the trommel. 2003, I officially set up Keenan Recycling as a limited company. So effectively, it's 20 years to go from a field at New Deer to a national waste management company collecting food waste.
But you're still using the field at New Deer.
Yes.
You've not given that back to your father yet.
No, I've bought all the land from him since. So he's done very well out the investment. Let's say that.
Yeah. So that's you're celebrating your 20th anniversary this year. That's technically 2023.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. Yeah, and I'm married 20 years this time as well.
I should big also, year for you, Grant. That's.
I know. I should also say as well, when I say I did this or I did that, when I really mean we, because the collection service is run by my wife Claire. She does all the hard work and runs the drivers, and we've got a fantastic team around us, you know, from the collection people to HR and PR and everyone involved. So there's a big team that's got us to where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, that's just seems that you're very kind of entrepreneurial. Just hearing your story there, Grant. Did you always kind of have that feeling, or did you expect it to grow to the size you are? Or did it one of those ones where you're like, well, it's working, let's keep going and see what happens, or did you plan?
Probably had no choice because I was no good at school, so I was never going to have a career in academia. No, I just I enjoyed sales. I'm effectively a salesman at heart. The first job I got when I left school was a door-to-door salesman selling oil paintings. So that taught me a lot about sales, and I got a buzz out of selling stuff. So that was the direction I wanted to go. And I had a kind of a faint idea that I would always like to run my own business, which fortunately I did early on at 19. I think the thing is that people always look at what we've built from this point and look back the way. Yeah. Yeah, I had no idea that we'd ever get to this kind of size. It's really kind of grown arms and legs, and we've had an awful lot of luck and opportunity behind us as well. So, so it's just one thing's built on another, and it's just kind of gone on, really.
Mm-hmm.
Is it luck or is it a hard work, Grant?
I've had this debate. I've had this debate with lots of people over the years, and it's a cocktail. You need luck. Anyone says that luck's got nothing to do with it, I don't buy into that. It's a bit like if you imagine a Monopoly board, you need the luck to land on the square to buy it, but it's what you do when you land on the square. You know, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. I like that. That's a good way to think of it, actually.
Or as somebody said to me once, 90% of success is showing up and 10% is what happens when you get there. You know, you've just got to put the effort in and put yourself about.
Yeah, no, good. I think I probably know the answer to this question because I think you've just mentioned it. But what's been your most favourite time? When was it? When did you enjoy it most, and sort of why? You know, what was the
the best time? Oh, two favourite times. One was when I got planning permission to build the In-Vessel system, because that was a pivotal moment in the whole journey. And I had 86 letters of objection. I had a campaign waged against us, and it was really difficult. It was a battle that went on for about a year, and had we not got planning permission, the business couldn't evolve. There had just been a garden waste composting site. It wouldn't have gone any further. So the day that we managed to eventually get that through, we were pretty elated. And the second one was when BGF invested, and I managed to pay my father back his money, because that always sat heavily on my shoulders. So they were probably my two favourite times.
Yeah. And in terms of your current role, plans for the future, what's your, if you're willing to share?
Yeah, so we've basically built a national platform. So we've had huge investment up front to do what we've needed to do. You know, we've around 100 trucks now operating throughout the UK. So the plan really is to fulfil the ambition, which was to have everything in place for the legislation, which should hopefully come this year or next or imminently, which will be similar to Scotland, which states that every business, if you produce, handle or sell food, must recycle it, and every local authority by law must offer the householder a food waste collection service. So really what I'm waiting on is that regulation coming into play, and then really seeing the business will go like that. But it's painful just now because we've made all the investment and processes and people and equipment. We were kind of promised the regulations would be in 2023, and they're still not here, although it's reached royal assent, so they have to come. We're just waiting on DEFRA saying when it will be. So that will keep us busy for the next few years, is really kind of fulfilling that and making sure that we can capitalize on that big opportunity. But then where it goes after that, I don't know.
Yeah. Do you think the infrastructure in England and Wales is ready for that change in terms of having capacity?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, it's a debate that's been raging for years, and we've had it in Scotland for nearly 10 years. 2014 it came in, and I always go to the conferences down there, and everyone's scratching their heads and what about this, what about that, and my message is the same every time. Just look across the border and look what Scotland did. We had the same debate, and it ran extremely smoothly and without any issue. It's so easily done. I think the problem is that in England, the hundreds of millions, maybe even thousands of millions, have been invested in anaerobic digestion plants, and they're all starving. They're all squealing for food because the legislation's not coming. You know, some plants are paying for waste, which is ridiculous, and so many have gone financially bankrupt that would really need some legislation to drive tonnage. Also, I think what government has to bear in mind is that investment cases are made by the private sector all the time, and a lot of it is off the back of imminent or projected legislation. And unless that legislation comes as it's intended, then the industry loses confidence and investment decisions won't be taken. And if that's the case, then we start going backwards and we won't have the facilities that we need to, not just organic waste, but any kind of waste. We just need certainty.
It is quite interesting that, as you say, that Scotland did this 10 years ago, and England and Wales is still not legislated for it, and it seems, it's a bit of a no-brainer in terms of recycling and recovery of resource, isn't it?
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and it does pay me when I come down to England and I see how much food waste is just being landfilled constantly, and we're going on about an energy problem that we've got just now, and you don't have to be Einstein to work to join the dots here, but it just needs leadership. That's the thing.
Yeah. Well, here's a question for you then. In terms of, obviously you're quite wedded to the recycling recovery of food waste. Has your role changed your sort of lifestyle habits and your approach to waste?
I suppose in terms of my role has changed in the business, because when you start a business, when it's just you have to do absolutely everything. You have to be the marketeer or the HR person or the salesperson or the accountant and do all those things. So I've kind of moved away from all those things now, so I can kind of concentrate more on the strategy and the growth. In terms of how I view the organic waste, I suppose everybody's becoming more knowledgeable, and the thing with investing in technologies is there's often just a window of opportunity where sometimes you don't want to dive too quickly into it and you realize that the technology doesn't do what it's meant to do, or it gets superseded by a better technology. So it's just hitting that window at the right time with the right resource. So I think in terms of viewing organic material, I think everybody has an eye on, well, what's the next technology going to be? Because you can imagine it probably won't be too long before even anaerobic digestion gets superseded when we look at the higher value proteins and things that can be extracted from food waste. And also, we've got to look at how it's funded with grant aid and tariffs and, ROCs and FITs and things like that. You can kind of see that the next thing is going to be the road transport fuel and collecting vehicles driven on by CNG produced by food waste. So I think kind of creating greener fuels and just really looking at any kind of waste stream as what's the best resource and outcome we can get from that effectively as a waste stream at outset. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm thinking a couple of things here. One, what's your views on the amount of food waste the country produces? Surely there's a realism that we need to actually start doing something about that, and we shouldn't it be, ideally you want the business, you want to go to a restaurant and pull up a couple of wheelie bins full of food waste, but the reality is, should that actually be current? Should these restaurants be looking at portion size better?
Yes,
not creating as much waste. All these sort of things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. It starts with ordering the right amount, portion sizes. Making sure giving customers doggy bags, and then I do firmly believe as well that there is a low yes, I want the waste, and so do the plants, but there's so much waste. If it's properly dealt with, it should go to, well, what can actually be used for human consumption, because it's ridiculous that all that food is being wasted, and then you have people either starving or having to go to food banks and things like that. So again, I think there needs to be a channeling of the food to the right area and following the hierarchy, and really what we as an industry do should be the absolute last resort, but at the moment we're not anywhere near any of those things.
Yeah.
How vocal are you about these things in your own personal life? If you're out for a meal with people or things like that, how
I probably learned to tone it down over the years. I still need some friends, you know.
That's pretty reasonable. Pretty reasonable. So in terms of, obviously you've described your business pretty full on by the sounds of it. How do you get away from it all? What do you do personally to get away from the daily challenges?
Nothing really. We kind of eat, sleep, and breathe the business every day, every night. Even if we manage to get some time on a beach or a ski slope, we're still talking about the business. So we're passionate about what we do. It kind of does. It becomes difficult to separate your life from your business. There's no doubt about that. But I don't know what the answer to that is. You can't really escape it, if I'm honest. And even when I go on holiday, I've always got my phone on. I can't get to the end of the day without looking at emails or texts, because it's almost more of a worry not knowing what's happening than than just ignoring it. So I'd rather find out or know.
Yeah. I think that's fair enough. I mean, we asked Alistair that question, and obviously most people that know him will say that he does his running. But my kind of thought process behind asking the question was because I knew a lot of people would kind of have an answer like what you said, Grant. They find it really difficult to switch off, and especially if it's, you're saying your wife works for the business as well. As a family business, like, it's not as if you can come home and talk about something else. It's probably always the top of everyone's minds. So it's interesting that you say that, and if that's how you manage it, you've more than 20 years of experience. If you think, as long as I'm happy that we chat about it and I check my emails and that gives me peace of mind, if it works for you, go for it, I suppose.
I was going to say that we've got a motorhome that we go away with, but when I recall the last trip, I was driving and Claire had double monitors set up in the seat and they're working.
That doesn't count.
As we drove, yeah. So.
Yeah, no, that doesn't count. I wouldn't have accepted that, I'm afraid, Grant. So
it looks like you're thriving it anyway. So I think you're fine. You're clearly enjoying it. Is there one fact that you know about the sector that you sort of feel that it'd be great if the public knew this, or is there someone out there that you think, it's really good if the public had a bit more awareness of things?
I think if the public were more informed, and it's not their fault, it's probably the industry's fault, that if they just understood more about the resource and the disconnect with energy and waste produced, and understood that if everybody plays their part in recycling food waste, then it goes a long way. Because as you touched on earlier, Alistair, socially, when I meet people and they say, what do you do for a living? More often than not, I'll say, where do you live? Is it like Aberdeenshire or whatever, to establish what bin they have. And then I'll say, well, the little green bin that you put your food in, well, I process that. And more often than not, they'll say, I don't have that bin, or I didn't know what to do with it, or I didn't know you could put the food in with the garden waste. So often it's not about the public not knowing what to do, or not wanting to do it. It's just they don't know. So my wish would be that if everybody understood, if you put that food in the bin, it gets turned into electricity or gas. Don't contaminate it, because it ends up either the digestate or the compost on a field, then it'd be really good. But at the moment, the public have got no idea, and there's still this sort of myth that all just goes in the same place, or why we bother in recycling, so I think everybody just needs to play a part.
I'm amazed, Grant, that we've managed so far into the interview without mentioning the C word. And you just mentioned the contamination issue, which I know has been a huge issue for the sector. Is it worth maybe just explaining a wee bit about plastic contamintation?
That's fine. When you said the C word, I thought you meant I was normally a bit sweaty. I think the thing is that what people don't understand is that we in the composting industry have to meet a standard, which is BSI Pass 100. So it's a publicly available specification. The BSI is the British Standards Institute. So the significance of that is that when the material comes into us, it's classed as a waste, but if we meet that standard, it goes out as a product, which then means that farmers in our market can use it as a product, and there's no anything that would be attributed to waste, like licenses or exemptions. So that's barrier one. And also attached to that is that if we don't meet that standard, it goes right back down the line. So the councils can't put it towards their recycling rates because it would still be a waste. So that's critically important. And in anaerobic digestion, they are similar. They are PAS 110 instead of PAS 100, but it's very similar. So part of that accreditation is contamination. So I can't remember what it's like. It's like 0.1% of that comes in. It's so tight. And it goes to a lab and they test it, so it has to be really clean. So people thinking they're doing the right thing, going to a recycling centre with a bin bag full of grass and then just heaving the bin bag in, when that gets to us, unless it's pulled out at the beginning and it goes through a shredder, you've then got hundreds, thousands of pieces of plastic through it. That's the first thing. The second thing is what everybody needs to be mindful of or understand is that we are then selling that compost to a farmer, and the farmer's biggest asset and his pride and joy is his land. So the last thing he wants is plastic and contamination arriving on his asset, which he's probably been a custodian of that land as it's been passed down the generations, and he'll pass it forward. That's because once plastic's on ground, it's virtually impossible to clean up. So I think the thing that I always say to people is, if you imagine if you buy a bag of compost at B&Q or wherever, and you put your hands in it and pulling out, it's organic matter. So the last thing you would want is a bit of glass or plastic or stuff. So imagine what you would want in a bag of compost. That's what we want to see going on to fields. But I think a lot of things have improved. Compostable bags is fantastic. The Leica Co-op are doing a brilliant job there. I think it will help with the ban of one-use plastics will help. But if we could get rid of plastic, then stop it hitting the waste stream, then that'd be a big step forward.
Good.
Yeah, that's good. That actually kind of covers what I was maybe going to ask next was, what would you like the public to know or things that they could change? But I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there in what you said, like a couple of points about when you talked about contamination as well, like just being able to word it in that way so people understand what you said about this is being used for energy. That's something relatable for the public, and also as the perfect one, like you go to B&Q, that's what you're looking for. Do you want to see plastic in it? So essentially it's finding something that the kind of day-to-day person can relate to and being able to explain it. And I think that's kind of a massive part of what we've discussed a lot in Albion and through Alistair, is what can we pick something to be able to explain what is quite a complex industry or topic, something that everyone can relate to is the best way to get the information out there. So I think that was really useful, what you said there, Grant. So I'm going to then quiz you on something else, which we're going to ask all our guests, and we'll hopefully have a bit of a dictionary worth of content. But the industry is probably known for quite a lot of jargon. So have you got anything that either you use or that comes up in your business that you want to share and telling everyone what it means as well?
Well, I was having a little bit of a think about acronyms, and a lot of them tend to be 3-letter acronyms for some reason, like IVCs, In-Vessel Composting, ABPs, animal byproducts, CNG, compressed natural gas, MRF, materials recycling facility. It does go on and on. Like, you've got also, I could go on all day with them, but I think it's the same as we're no different from any other industry. As people use acronyms and just assume that everybody knows what they mean. It's fine if you know somebody's in that industry and been in it for a while, but I think we have to be mindful when we're speaking to people that aren't in the industry or are new to the industry that we shouldn't assume, and we should just take a little bit longer and just say the full word.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think I'll be a good example of that. When I joined Albion and was getting stuck in a lot of the work, I always thought that it was written in code, because I thought, I don't know, every couple of words was an acronym, and I thought, I don't know what that means. And I spent half my day asking someone or Googling it. So yeah, it does, like when you were talking about trying to educate the wider public, I think, as you said, that's a great place to start, is actually explaining what you're talking about and not assuming. But as you said, every industry's guilty for it. I suppose it makes it easier. But yeah, I mean, you listed off quite a few there, so that'll tick off. We'll need to keep a list, so everyone else we got on your something new.
I think that's right, and it's just a case of if you don't know, just put your hand up and say, stop, what did you say there? What does that mean? Or if you're too shy, I don't have the confidence, or I don't feel it's appropriate to interrupt somebody, then just take a note and Google it or whatever, so that you at least understand it at the end of the day, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, final question, I suppose. You might have covered it because you've said quite a few things, Grant, that you would maybe like to see changed, but technically this might be one that you think's maybe unrealistic. So if you had a magic wand across the industry, is there one thing you would love to see changed, and what is it?
Yeah, there's one very big thing that I touched on earlier, is the Environment Bill, the 2023 regulations coming in for mandatory food waste collections in England. That would be my one single wish.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately, it looks like Wales are going to start in October and follow Scotland's lead. So England now hopefully will feel a bit of pressure to do so. But that's the biggest thing that will transform organic recycling and recycling rates in England, that the government has the ability to do in the blink of an eye. Yeah,
I think that's brilliant. And yeah, as you said, it's not really that unrealistic. So fingers crossed, as you were saying at the start of the podcast, 2023's big anniversary for a few things. So maybe that might be another one. We'll look back at the end of the year and you could maybe say, well, that happened that year as well. So wishful thinking, but you never know.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Could well be a late Christmas present for you, Grant.
I know. I'd prefer it if it was a spring present, but
sooner rather than later. Yeah, absolutely.
Can live in hope.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was really, really interesting for me as well, and hearing about your journey through the business and how you built everything up. And I think especially from Alistair probably found it interesting as well. You have a lot of things about building up your own business and similarities and similar struggles. And within that, it was an interesting story, but you also covered a lot of really interesting points, and I certainly took away some new things. So hopefully our listeners do as well. So I can only say thank you very much.
Well, I definitely. Sorry, Grant. I definitely never knew your first job was selling oil paintings. Were you successful at that?
Well, I was actually, and I still attribute that to a lot of the success I had for a few reasons. One was that I came back one day to the guy whose car we were in, and he said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "I've not sold anything." And he said, "But you know you're going to sell again, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "So every time you don't get a sale, tell yourself you're one door closer to your next sale." So a lot of the bit was resilience, keep going. And the other thing was that if you could, at 17, bang a stranger's door at 5:30 at night and get through the door and sell oil paintings, anything that you ever sold to anyone was going to be easier than that. But I was good at it. I made quite a lot of money out of it, and it gave me a real thirst for sales. It did a lot for me. But look, thank you guys for taking the time to interview me. I've really enjoyed it, and I think what you're both doing is absolutely fantastic, and I wish you all the best, and hopefully we'll get the message out to the wider public on every kind of waste stream and process that everyone's involved in.
Perfect. Thank you from me. Thank you very much as well for giving us the time.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers, both.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.